I'm going to concentrate on the data aspect because of the roles I have in my day-to-day life. I'm a teacher and trade unionist, and in these roles, data and indeed research are vital. Data is vital to research that enables the work we do as educators and campaigners to move forward and to be relevant and to inform decision-making. It's the power behind the information, and this is true for a multitude of decision-making across a multitude of aspects of life, all over the world, for everyone. And clearly this includes women, which is who are a distinct sex class with distinct needs, weaving through all aspects of life. We need to unpick those, not erase them or confuse them by redefining or blurring what it means to be a woman. So why have Women's Place UK specifically identified the rigorous collection and analysis of sex-based data as one of the 5 resolutions for 2019 and beyond, I hope? And why indeed was it one of the original campaign principles? Well, when we campaign, we use facts, and facts are informed by data. We look at what the impact of the changes to these facts will be if there is a change to legislation, conditions, funding of any kind through policy, etc. So we need the accurate and reliable facts, the data. These must be robust and open to scrutiny. Therefore, if we're looking at facts linked to, for example, the gender pay gap, the rates of progression by sex, equality of access to CPD, continuous professional development and training, rates of sexual harassment, levels of domestic violence, levels of sexual assault committed, access to medical screening and the funding that's required to see programmes through, all those sort of things. I could go on. So let's look at some of those in a little bit more detail. For example, let's look at gender pay gap. In order to have accurate information, data and evidence to combat the gender pay gap, you need to collect data related to those who have always worked as women, people who have never benefited from being in work as men with the inherent benefits that men get in the workplace. In fact, people who have not benefited from being educated as males with the expectations that enable them to have access to particular subjects that are deeply embedded in our society and in our schools. This, of course, relates to the deeply damaging and discriminatory impact of gender stereotyping that plays such a negative role in our society, let alone the overt sexist attitudes that exist in many of our workplaces. And then, of course, there are the sexist behaviours and attitudes that lead to discrimination in relation to maternity issues. Data will be affected and become invalid if it's not a true reflection of the facts. Therefore, there could be an impact on the gap, and it could therefore hide the true gender pay gap. It is commonly known as the gender pay gap, but it is clearly more accurate to describe it as the sex pay gap. There is already evidence that there is diminishing levels of participation in equalities monitoring because women are withdrawing from a process that they no longer value. And there's also issues related to campaigning linked to the biologically defined stages in life, such as pregnancy and the menopause. Will women be inclined to participate in data collection for campaigns around that refer to them as a person with a uterus or a person with a cervix? We are women who may be going through a biological stage in our lives. The discrimination we face in the workplace during these stages is something that we have fought against for decades, and we're still fighting discrimination linked to these biological stages, linked to career progression and pay progression. The data collected to campaign around these issues has to be true. It's also vital that as a society we are made aware of the extent of the sexual harassment and violence against women that Karen and Kiri have both outlined. And we must tackle this. In order to do this, we need the facts. This means we need reliable and accurate data, and this means it must reflect the sex-based nature of this harassment and abuse. There is already a woeful lack of services for all the victims of sexual violence, and we must have robust data available to secure the much-needed resources for victims of abuse, as Karen has outlined. So what we are seeing in those very facts that we rely on to campaign is being skewed already by a lack of participation, lack of clarity with definitions that are not clear, and a lack of trust in that data that is likely to result from the monitoring and collection of it. Now, one area of data that involves everyone is the census. UK census authorities are beginning to prepare for the 2021 census. The Scottish Government have prepared legislation to amend the Census Act of 1920, that's like about 100 years ago, in order to enable questions on sexual orientation and gender identity on a voluntary basis. That 100 years is important, by the way. The bill is currently passing through the Scottish Parliament, and Women's Place UK submitted written evidence to the committee responsible for scrutinising this legislation. The Scottish Census Authority is also considering adding a third option to the sex question so that respondents would be able to choose male, female or other. However, the Office for National Standards in England and Wales have ruled this out due to concerns about data quality, and the question will in England and Wales remain a binary one, so male or female. Now, in submissions to the Scottish Parliament by women, they have made the point that there is clearly no disagreement at all about the value of gathering more data on the population who identify as trans, and that they recognise that the debate is all about what happens with the question on sex. It is important that the census continues, as it has done for many, many years, to capture data on sex as a protected characteristic in terms that are consistent with the Equality Act 2010, and that the 2010 Act clearly has two category definitions of sex, male and female. There are no more categories, and to introduce a third category, as the bill proposes that the census be amended to do, would take the approach out of consistency and compliance with the Equality Act 2010, and actually what it would also do would remove the consistency with the data set that has been collected for decades, and the ability to compare that data over time is really important. And it would definitely create issues for quality monitoring and data use. As we know, if you alter data information in any type of equation or planning, it will change the dynamics and the balance, and it then will alter the outcomes. The collection on sex in the census really does matter. The database is important, and if consistent, provides really key data source for resources, allocation and planning at a population level. Knowing how many male and female citizens is vital for public servants for their planning and delivering of public service, and it's also important for statisticians. Census data provides the baseline for other official statistics such as health, education and criminal justice data. If you change the parameters of the database loses its worth. I want to return to my role as a trade unionist. In the response to from the TUC to the gender recognition consultation, in the additional points that were made by the TUC, we made points around the issue of data because we recognised the importance of considering any change to law on changes to data collection. And the submission recognised that unions are committed to good quality, robust equality monitoring with accurate data needed across all equality strands. That includes sex. The need for a renewed commitment to the importance of equality monitoring and equality impact assessment from government and employers. That includes sex. And the need to build the confidence of members to take part, and that will include our women members in the trade union movement. Therefore, the vigorous collection and analysis of sex-based data and high-quality research must remain central in a women's rights campaign.